Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lessons in Leadership series brought to you by Manage the Docs, a community for technical communication leaders. My name is Akash. We are back with another leadership lesson for you guys. Today, I'm talking to a special guest, Marco Marino. He's the Vice President of Worldwide Business Engagement at Globalization Partners International, GPI in short form. Marco has over 20 years of experience in the language world, beginning in 1997, when he was a designated Italian/Spanish onboard interpreter for Continental Airlines. Marco has held business development roles at LUZ, Salesforce, and most recently was a division vice president at United Language Group. In addition, Marco is an advisor to the Rutgers University Customer Experience Program and has sat on the board of directors of the Italian American Academy of San Diego and Formula One Life, a Christian charity. In his free time, Marco cherishes spending time with his wife and 3 children. Marco loves exercising, photography, libraries, and museums, to name a few things that he likes. And I shouldn't forget, he loves motorsport racing as well. Thanks, Marco, for accepting our invitation and offering to share localization-related business insights with us.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I've been very excited about this time that I'm going to spend with you, and looking forward to it. Not super often that I get to do something like this where it's actually recorded, so I've been very excited about it, and I'm looking forward to having this interaction. So thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
You're most welcome. So I have a few questions. I thought I will ask you those. And in addition to that, if you want to add anything else, please feel free.
Sure.
My first question to you is, which are the top 3 languages into which English technical documentation are translated?
Sure. To answer that, it's a difficult question to generalize because it's really going to depend what region of the world you're in. The top 3 languages, if you were based in Europe, would be one thing. If you were based in Asia, they'd be another thing. However, let's just go from North America because that's where I'm based and that's where I've always worked. I've done business around the world, but my home base has always been here in North America. I'm in San Diego. And for us, I mean, it's not a huge surprise, but the top 3 languages would be Spanish, French Canadian, and then Brazilian Portuguese. So kind of encompassing all North and South America. When we see tech pubs that are for this region, those are generally the languages that they're localized into.
Interesting. Yeah, so that should definitely give all the leaders in the tech-com space some idea about what's going on when it comes to different languages, especially for North American region, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and there's in the past, I've been doing a lot of business in Latin America. In fact, it was one of my specialties. I did business in Latin America for many years, and previously, there were some hesitations in opening up and doing business down there, but those have been emerging markets for a long time. And I think over time, they've really become, very powerful markets for people to do business in. Obviously there's fluctuations like there is in our country right now, but they're definitely good business markets and good places to do business. People are very friendly and loyal, and it's a pleasure to work with them.
So you're leading me actually nicely into my next question.
Sure.
Which are the new emerging markets or the read languages that businesses should start focusing on?
Yeah, another good question, but another difficult one to answer because it'll be based on your location, but even more importantly, be based on the sector of business that you're in. For example, there's emerging markets that we see in the hospitality industry that are going to be different from the mining industry because they're in different regions of the world or there's different focuses. But 3 of the regions that we've seen quite a bit of business coming from, in general for emerging markets would be Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. So for example, in Southeast Asia, seen a lot more requests for translations for Vietnamese, Thai, and Malaysian. Vietnamese and Thai in particular, over the past 2 years, I've seen a real big uptick in a lot of different industries as those countries, become continually growing emerging markets. Additionally, we look at Western Asia, so Russian and Turkish. have also become more commonplace, seeing those a bit more. I mean, Russia's obviously a powerhouse, a huge country, and I think Turkey is able to take advantage of Europe. It's in a strategically perfect place because it's half in Europe and it's half in Asia. And I know I've been there, so it's kind of funny where you can go to Asia for lunch and go back to Europe for the rest of your day. So that's in a very strategically important place, you know, being in Europe and in Asia. So seen work there. And then most recently as well, you know, we've seen an uptick in East and South African markets. So yeah, East and South African markets. So that would primarily include Afrikaans, which is spoken in South Africa, and then Swahili, which is the, you know, the main like secondary language, although there are hundreds of languages in Africa, and each country has numerous languages and dialects. Afrikaans and Swahili are the other two emerging languages that we've seen. I would mention, you know, the Spanish and the Portuguese, but, you know, those were part of the BRIC countries, and that was a few years ago. Things are changing a little bit. So
yeah, those are great insights. And I'm sure that people will benefit from knowing these nuances and things that you're sharing.
For sure.
In addition, I would definitely want to know, are there best practices that tech publications can follow to ensure that their content can be translated at the most cost-effective and high quality at the same time?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. In fact, I've been working with technical writers and doing tech pubs translations for probably 15 years of my career, so I'm pretty familiar with it. Really what it comes down to in terms of authoring for technical publications is planning ahead and knowing ahead of time if these publications or these, you know, technical documentations are ever going to be translated. Because if they are going to be translated someday, you kind of have a different mindset of preparing them than if they're just going to be for, you know, an English audience. So one perfect example, and this could be used for English, you know, language tech pubs, but especially for the ones, you know, if you're trying to do translations cost effective. And also we want to talk about cost effective. We also want to increase readability and the ability to understand, because there's soft costs associated with that as well. Yeah. Generally, technical publications that are confusing, there's more calls into the customer service to ask questions. If your technical documentation is straightforward and easy to understand, there's going to be less calls. Therefore, you know, that's a soft cost that a lot of people don't realize. So simple English is definitely one of them. And I'll give you a perfect example. Say you have a desktop computer and the instructions say to turn on the computer, press the red button. Okay. You can simplify that to hit red button to turn on. I mean, things like that. So simplifying the language and reducing the amount of text. Couple of advantages, obviously less to translate, so the cost goes down. And we talked about those soft costs as well. Yeah. And also you increase the readability. Another thing is focusing on graphics and visuals with less text, because they can be used universally. You know, IKEA does a great job of that, and there are other retailers out there that do a great job of using, you know, pictographs. And as you see, there's very little text. So again, going back to very little text, very little to less to translate, because you're relying on the visuals to provide the instructions for you. Yeah. But it's also important to work, you know, to keep costs down, to work with a reputable language service provider, and one in particular that has experience with technical writing and authoring, because, you know, a lot of the authoring tools now can be pretty complicated. Not everyone has experience with how to utilize them best. And probably most importantly within that would be the translation memory aspect. And it's a little difficult to explain translation memory. I'm sure some of your audience already understands it, but essentially it's a software program that translators use to take advantage of repeat text. And that's the easiest way to explain it. So it's very important, especially for technical publications where a lot of information can be repeated, that that translation memory is being used, because that'll reduce costs, take advantage of repeat text. It'll increase the consistency across the translations. And the other thing too that's equally important is it reduces turnaround times, because there's less to translate as the translation memory grows.
True, very true. Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think these are all good tips. Some of it I was aware of, and I know a lot of people in our community are aware of, but some of the things are very useful, and thinking about how to simplify content, because many a times you want to be accurate, we want to convey as much information as we can, But if we know that we are going to localize the product and we are going to translate our content, then we need to start writing differently. We need to use minimalism and things like those to make it easier
Yeah,
and
exactly.
to reduce the cost.
And another thing I was going to add too, in terms of writing, is using more simple English, but also plain English. Avoiding colloquialisms, avoiding regional references.
Yeah.
The reason why they don't always translate well, they can lose the reader, but more importantly, again, the more difficult something is written, the longer it's going to take the translator to do it, and the more chances they either don't get the message right, or there'll be a lot of back and forth, which can end up increasing costs.
Agree. Thanks for those tips. I think that's useful for the community leads. Okay, moving on to the other question that I had was about, again, in the area of trying to reduce costs, being more cost effective, but at the same time, keeping quality in mind.
Sure.
Are there tools that can help us save cost? Because there is so much about AI that's happening in artificial intelligence that's happening in the software world. So are there tools that can help you save cost by offering some kind of AI-based, high-quality machine translation?
Yeah, very, very relevant question. And I've seen machine translation, or MT as we call it, evolve in my 20 plus years working in this industry. And it has gone from being very bad to much better. Will it ever replace humans? There's a lot of arguments out there. I don't think it will in our lifetime. And I don't think that it ever will, period, for certain types of applications. Kind of the latest and greatest, as it were, in machine translation now is using neural networks, so neural machine translation. And essentially what the neural machine translation attempts to do is to replicate the thinking patterns of a human brain. One of the challenges that they've always had, though, with machine translation in general, that's improved with NMT, but still difficult, is language is subjective, and it's very difficult to teach a machine the subjectivity of language. The other thing that's been difficult with previous iterations of machine translation, whether it be rule-based or statistical, they were called, was the human brain. The human brain predicts based on previous experiences, previous actions. That has been very difficult to teach a machine how to do. But with neural machine translation, we're starting to see better quality and better predictions. Because it's looking at words it's looking at the text on a per word level instead of on like sequences. There's certain applications where machine translation, neural machine translation, it can work well. For example, some straightforward manuals I know are starting to be used for that. And then also, e-discovery for litigation. So when they have mounds of documents and they're looking for specific keywords and they don't want to spend $1 million translating something, they can definitely use machine translation. These neural networks are getting better because they're actually being trained. So they're taking the translation memory that we talked about before and glossaries and actually feeding them into the neural machine translation engine and educating it like you would a child so that they're able to predict things and work better in the future is kind of the idea. However, the neural machine translation is not recommended for highly regulated materials like medical device instructions or even advertising. Again, going back to the subjectivity of language, especially the flowery language of advertising, it just doesn't, it's not able to pick it up. But either way, what we're seeing now with more and more use of neural machine translation is something that we call, post-edit or human review, which is something that's always recommended. I mean, I hear people all the time saying, oh yeah, we translated our website using Google Translate, or we used, I don't know, a Shopify plugin, et cetera, et cetera. Should never just rely on what the machine kicks out. You should always have a human do a review. It's very important. Like at the end of the day, it's a machine, it's not a human. So it's getting a lot better to answer your question, but it's not replicated. In terms of tools, actually over the past few months, we've been looking closer at an NMT, NMT engines. And actually the one that we like the best is a company out of Hungary called Globalization. And they've, within our community, have a great reputation. And from our testing, we found it to be one of the highest quality machine translation engines, neural machine translation engines out there.
Nice. Okay. So that's very helpful. because I'm sure there are people who are looking at options and trying out things. And if there's a reference available, then they would definitely go by that. Thank you.
Sure.
That
For
helps.
sure.
On a related note, yes, we want to look at optimizing cost for our content, but content is not just of one type now. There are different types of things that the TechPubs team is producing. Uh, so are there trends and best practices with regard to localization of videos and voice-based apps? Because that's another area or type of content that our teams are producing.
Certainly. And again, very, it's a very appropriate conversation right now with the current state of the world, where more and more things are becoming virtual. We're working virtually, we're having virtual meetings, virtual conferences. And then also, thinking about the younger generations, been doing some reading recently. They're a lot more focused on sort of video and app-based learning and app-based consumerism. So, this is a very important question. There's a lot of different things to keep in mind. I'll go over a few of the ones that I think are the most important, but kind of the primary number one important thing to focus on for the localization of videos and voice is really understanding the market and the target audience and culture. So the days of one size fits all are gone. We're now very individualistic. There's a lot of notable different, you can't just create one thing and give it to the world and expect it to work. Okay. Things have to be customized, and, it can be very easy to offend different cultures. If the videos or, voices aren't handled correctly, perfect example, say you're doing a translation of a voice translation for an app, and for France, and you're not using a native French speaker. Well, what does that say about your company if you're using someone who doesn't even have the correct accent, for French? Another thing, example I read about recently that I thought was interesting, soap commercial. So there was a soap commercial from France where there's a woman in a bathtub, and you can't see anything obviously, and her husband comes in and brings her a bar of soap. Okay, that worked fine in Europe, a little bit more open society, perfect commercial. They aired the same commercial in Japan, and it caused a huge uproar because something like that would be seen as an invasion of privacy. So little things like that, understanding your market and your target audience and culture ahead of time, because you can completely kill your product if you do it incorrectly. Another thing is important is really working with an experienced language translation company that specializes in audio video localization and really has documented workflow processes. A certified organization is better. We hear of ISO certification, kind of buzzwords, but what the ISO certification means is that organization is held to a higher standard by a third party for quality control. Yep. You want to make sure that whoever you work with has a pool of professional and experienced voice talent. We're talking earlier about saving money. You can certainly save money by using non-professional voice actors, but the chances of losing your target audience and maybe even having to reshoot the videos goes up. So it's better to work with a company that uses top professional experienced voice talents, and then also, has professional audio editors and directors so that they can direct this video and make sure that it is shot correctly and as professionally as possible. You also want to try to, as best as possible, match the voice and the actors to your target audience. There's nothing worse than having, a video with a certain type of person for a completely different market, and people just think they can't relate to it. So you want to make sure that the voice and the actual actors match your target audience. Always ask for samples. Any reputable language translation company will have voice samples that you can go through to choose which one you like. You want male or female, younger, older, this accent, that accent. Those things are very important as well. The other thing that can be important is to decide whether or not to do a voiceover or use subtitles. Okay, going back to the cost thing again, obviously subtitles are less expensive. But they can be more taxing on the viewer. And if it's a longer video, there could be a chance of you losing the audience, because there's been studies that after a while, people get tired of reading subtitles, okay? The other thing is you want to avoid including references to information that could change from market to market or change over time. You don't want to make references in these videos to things that are, say, only in California when, or in the United States when you're going to show this video in India, for example. You'll just lose the audience. You want to also, leave time. We always hear about last minute projects, in everyone's world, but these types of projects, especially audio video localization, cannot be rushed because they take a lot of time. Just to kind of give you an example of how lengthy of a process it is, for every 1 minute of video, it's approximately 10 minutes of voice recording time. So if you have a 30-minute video, then you've got 300 minutes to actually record it. You multiply that by a couple of languages and you see that something like this could take weeks. So you should never take for granted the amount of time that it takes to create these videos professionally. Yeah. One other thing, two last things that I want to mention is, sometimes it's better to have voice actors that are off screen and just have the actual voice appear rather than the actor, because with the actor on screen, it goes back to the challenges we talked about before. Is it a right fit for the culture? Are you going to have to reshoot it with somebody who is a better fit? Also, on-screen text is another difficult one. If you're doing a manual for how to put together a dresser and you have on-screen instructions in English, but the video's in French, well, people aren't going to put two and two together. So you're going to have to go back and reshoot the video and put those instructions in French. So better to leave those out. And the last, probably most important, second most important after understanding the market, is always to test before launch. Whether it's the voice-based apps or the videos, you want to make sure that you have them tested by native speakers that are affiliated with your organization, just to make sure that everything works. Because once they're done and you have to go back and make changes, it starts to get really expensive. And again, you want to keep the integrity of your brand intact by creating professional and relevant materials.
Wow, those are a lot of tips and very useful ones. Thank you so much, Marco. Really appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule. I know you have a lot of customer commitments and you have so many meetings, and amidst all of that, you helped us with these tips. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And this was a lot of fun, and I'd be happy to do it again. And you have my contact information. If any of your subscribers have any questions or would like to talk to me more about anything, I would be, thrilled to be able to continue talking.
Definitely. We will post this and we will also post the details there so they can
Thank you so much.
Thank you.